Namaskar and welcome to Diplomatic Dispatch. I'm Vikas Swarup and I'll be your host on this brand new show which will bring you exclusive insights into the world of international diplomacy from an Indian perspective. Now, diplomacy has generally been seen as a complex and intricate discipline, a process conducted secretly behind closed doors within small networks of professional diplomats, and as an abstract concept which does not really matter to the common man. Our show will break all these myths. We will try to demystify diplomacy, make it accessible to everyone, and show you how foreign policy affects each and every one of us. Diplomacy is not just about politics and economics. It is about everything that shapes the global perception of India. So we will also explore the influence that India's soft power is having, with yoga and Ayurveda going global, and Indian art, music, films and cuisine wowing folks across the world, from Argentina to Australia. We will bring you inspiring stories from the overseas Indian community, which has become an integral partner in India's progress, and whose members are scaling new heights of excellence and achievement. We will showcase how diplomacy can be a catalyst for development, and how India's large market and dynamic economy, our leadership in renewable energy, and our strides in science, technology, services, and space are creating opportunities for all our partners. As the world's largest democracy and a country representing 1/6 of humanity, India's voice is not just heard at international forums, it is taken seriously. And as a resurgent India redefines its engagement with the world, Diplomatic Dispatch will be there to document it. Every week, I will bring you a new dispatch with a new guest who will enlarge our understanding of foreign affairs and show us why the world matters to India and why India matters to the world. For this, our very first show, I have a very special guest, someone who has spent a lifetime in service of Indian diplomacy and advancing India's interests abroad. Foreign affairs has been his abiding passion, leading him to an MA in political science and an MPhil and PhD in international relations. He joined the Indian Foreign Service in 1977 and rose to the highest position. He has been India's ambassador to the Czech Republic, High Commissioner to Singapore, the longest-serving Indian envoy to China, and was ambassador to the United States when he was appointed Foreign Secretary in January 2015. He speaks at least 5 languages, has written a best-selling book titled The India Way, Strategies for an Uncertain World, and has been honored with the Padma Shri. He is the quintessential diplomat's diplomat, someone who is as much at ease decoding the nuances of trade pacts as he is helping Indian expats navigate the post-COVID world. And he brings a wealth of experience, energy, and expertise to his current job as India's top diplomat. It is therefore a pleasure and a privilege to welcome India's External Affairs Minister, Dr. Jaishankar, to Diplomatic Dispatch. Good evening, Dr. Jaishankar, and thank you so much for agreeing to be my first guest.
Well, it's a great pleasure, and I really wish you, Vikas, all the best on this show. I think it's a show which is perhaps needed to explain foreign policy in everyday terms, and I'm so glad you have taken that up.
Thank you, Dr. Jaishankar. As you have rightly said, this show is meant to demystify diplomacy and make it accessible to everyone. So my first question is the most basic one. Why does diplomacy matter, and how does it impact the common man?
Well, there's a difficult or a complicated answer. There's a very simple answer. The simple answer, just think about what we are going through. COVID times, something which started abroad has come back and come to devastate this country. How people's lives have changed, how travel has been impacted, and how actually relationships have helped us to deal with that. If you look at it today in a variety of ways, and I'm giving you COVID as a very extreme example. If you are a traveler stuck outside, if you're a student wanting to go outside, if you're a business person whose business is stuck, if you are actually someone sitting at home, you don't have to go abroad to want foreign policy to be in your support. You can be sitting at home, but whether you might need oxygen as we did during the second COVID wave, or in the initial one, masks and PPE. So I think COVID itself is a very good illustration of how much today foreign policy and diplomacy can make a difference in our lives. But it's beyond COVID and it's before COVID. Our security is ensured by foreign policy and diplomacy. Our economic interests are ensured. Our employment possibilities, our technology growth. So we are in a globalized era. And a globalized era means foreign policy is not foreign. It means foreign policy has reached your home. It determines your existence. It shapes your life.
Absolutely. And I think the whole idea of this program is to make foreign policy accessible to everyone so that they can understand how foreign policy is important to us in our everyday life.
Yeah, absolutely.
So this brings me to the next question. Can diplomacy be left to diplomats?
Well, it's a yes and no answer. I think diplomacy, like any other serious profession, requires skills, requires training, requires nurturing, requires preparation, requires experience, and obviously only diplomats have it. At the same time, diplomacy also requires a vision, which for all countries, especially big ones like ours, requires leaders to lay out the vision. It requires us to deal with other domains which have their own specialists. So you might want to tap on somebody's scientific experience or health experience or trade experience. But I would say the core profession or the core activity is clearly something which needs to be done by people who are trained and practiced to understand foreign cultures. How do you get your work done in a different environment, different language, different system? So as I said, the answer is predominantly a yes with a little bit of help from other people.
Absolutely. So let us now turn to the actual practice of diplomacy. And I think let's focus on Prime Minister's recent visit to the United States.
Sure.
As you know, this was his first visit outside the Indian subcontinent in 21 months. It was his first in-person interaction with President Biden and Vice President Kamala Harris. You were with him during that trip. How do you assess the state of India-US ties, and where does India fit into the priorities of this new US administration?
Well, the state of India-US ties, I think, is good, perhaps more than good. It's come a long way. It's come a long way, especially the last 7 years, since I remember Prime Minister Modi's visit in 2014. You were there as well during
and
the
you
Obama,
were the ambassador
during
who supervised the entire
administration.
visit.
So we have, I put it to you this way. There are very few domains of activities where we don't have something going on between India and the United States. It's in business, it's in innovation, it's in education, it's in security. I mean, you name it, there's some kind of collaboration going on. And that, to my mind, is a full spectrum relationship. Now, it has not happened automatically. I mean, a lot of people had to work to make this happen, still continue to work to make it happen. Now, which actually is my answer to your, do you need diplomats to do diplomacy? But where are we today? I think today we are in a very solid place. It's a very strong relationship. It is acquiring really more substance with each passing year. This visit was particularly good. Prime Minister Modi and Vice President Biden know each other. I mean, they met in 2014. At that time, the Vice President had actually hosted him in the State Department. They've had a virtual meeting after President Biden became president. They've also had some phone conversations. But, at the end of the day, in diplomacy and in politics, there's nothing like an in-person meeting. And, when they met, you could see that it was a very substantive meeting. I mean, in many ways, it was interesting because though it was for a Quad summit for which the Prime Minister went, he actually had a very long bilateral meeting. It had really all the trappings and the substance and the format of a bilateral visit as well.
And I believe President Biden spoke very fondly of his association with India, of his family's association. So how was the chemistry between the two leaders?
Oh, the chemistry, well, you know, for the chemistry, you don't need to take my word. You actually need to see the pictures of them dealing with each other. And I think President Biden was obviously very warm, very focused. Prime Minister was also, you know, was Prime Minister. He was very, on his part also, very encouraging of that bonding, which was very visible. You know, there is, in politics, in diplomacy, perhaps the most important attribute is chemistry. If chemistry goes well, a lot of problems solve themselves, a lot of opportunities open up. I think this was a case where the structures were very good, interests are very convergent, a lot of hard staff work went into it. But at the end of the day, if the summit was good, if the Quad meeting was good, it was because the chemistry between Prime Minister and President Biden was actually very strong. And as I said, it showed especially when the press came in, when the two of them were in the Oval Office, and the ease with which, you know, they were chatting with the press. I think that spoke for itself.
As you rightly said, this visit was also marking the first in-person meeting of the Leaders Summit of the Quad. But the leaders met under the shadow of this new agreement that has taken place between the United States, the United Kingdom, and Australia, called the AUKUS. And there has been some commentary that for the United States, the AUKUS is more important than the Quad. So I have two questions for you. How do you see the future of Quad in the Indo-Pacific? And do we need to be worried about AUKUS overshadowing the Quad?
Well, you know, I would really dispute the fact that the Quad summit took place under the shadow of AUKUS. I don't think there was a shadow, and I'll come to the AUKUS bit later. Let's look at the Quad. You know, what is the Quad? Why do we need the Quad? Why actually has it come to be created? The answer is that there is a realization today in the world, starting from the United States, which is still the most powerful country in the world, that it is not possible for any single country to deal with the world's problems by itself. Okay, everybody needs friends, everybody needs partners. So we are today in a more partnership-driven, you can say slightly more humbler world, if you would, and a more open-minded world. And these four countries have found over the years that their interests, especially in the Indo-Pacific, but not limited to the Indo-Pacific, have been very convergent on many of the big issues of the day, you know, maritime security, terrorism, connectivity. I can give you a long list of issues. They actually find that they think in similar forms, and they are able to work together. But step back a bit, you know, what has also happened is, if no single country can deal with the world by itself, if no single relationship between two countries can deal with it, and also I would argue that the multilateral world doesn't have anymore the clout, the efficiency, the energy, the credibility to deal with this. It opens up a space. You know, one can't do it, two can't do it, but 193 can't do it. Then somewhere in that space, groups of countries who get along with each other say, okay, let's sit and look at these set of problems. And that's, a Quad is a very good example. Now, when it comes to AUKUS, look, to my mind, AUKUS was an understanding agreement reached between three countries for a very specific purpose. The purpose was to do with a nuclear power submarine which Australia intends to acquire. Now, it's not that the Quad countries don't have relationships with other countries in twos and threes. I mean, look at us in India. Yes. We have a trilateral between India, Australia, and Japan. We have a trilateral between India, Australia, and Indonesia. Okay, we have trilaterals with the United States. We have with the Japanese as well. So this is a world today of a different kind of diplomacy, where three countries, four countries, five countries get together and say, okay, it's issue-based, it's sometimes region-based, it's comfort-based. I think it's a new world beyond the unipolar, bipolar, structured sort of system that we have been brought up to assume is normal. I think that normal is gone. This is the beginning of a new normal.
Absolutely. Prime Minister also interacted with the CEOs of some leading American companies such as Qualcomm, Blackstone, General Atomics, First Solar, and Adobe.
Right.
At a time when business sentiment has been depressed due to the COVID-19 pandemic, what was the big message that Prime Minister Modi was giving to America Inc.?
You know, business has been obviously very tough in COVID times, but don't go by that headline statement, because look at our own situation today. FDIs into India have been very strong.
Yes.
Economic recovery in India has been, again, very visible. Trade, our exports, we might actually record perhaps one of our best years, if not the best year of our export. And we have, initiated a number of reforms today, which make us a much more, I would say, viable, credible destination for foreign companies, especially tech kind of companies. So the meetings which he did, and this what you saw is a very typical representation of the Prime Minister's visit. When he goes abroad, there's a lot of homework. You go through a process of selecting who should you meet. There's a lot of preparation. He himself immerses himself in that. And if you just look at the 5 companies, you had Qualcomm, which deals with semiconductors and, in a sense, hardware. You have Adobe, which deals with artificial intelligence. You have General Atomics, which deals with drones. You had Blackstone, which deals with finance. And you had First Solar, which deals with renewables. Yes. And these are actually the priorities today in many ways for us. And I sat in on many of those meetings, and I can tell you what the sentiments I heard about India were definitely not depressed. It was, they saw the opportunities in India. Each one of them believed that their business in India would grow. They appreciated the ease of doing business, rankings getting better. The fact that today the quality of human resources in India has improved, that it's a much better ecosystem for innovation and startups. So I would say it was for me quite a positive experience.
But there has been some concern in business circles that our Atmanirbhar program, for instance, can create barriers for foreign companies trying to enter into India. How do you address those concerns?
Partly by telling them the truth, explaining the landscape, and making them understand that Atmanirbhar Bharat is not about protectionism. It's not about going backwards. It is actually about building strengths in India, preventing the hollowing out of the Indian economy, checking the deindustrialization of India, which would happen if you actually continued as a market without developing your own capabilities. And in fact, what you try to convince our partners, and I think with a fair degree of success here, is a more capable India has more to contribute, will make a higher grade partner, will generate new demands which are good for the global economy, will be an additional engine of growth for the global economy, which wants today to de-risk itself. The world is not comfortable, especially after COVID, being dependent on limited geographies. So I would argue, once you sit down and tell people, saying, look, this is what Atmanirbhar Bharat means, that it is actually an invitation to make more in India, but make for the world. It is a partnership with Indian business, with Indian technology, with Indian human resources. So we have, look, there's been a lot of propaganda about this, as in a lot of other areas. So I think we need to sort of set people's minds at rest. And I would say to a large extent we have succeeded in doing so, which is why the FDI numbers are up.
Yes, absolutely. The final component of Prime Minister Modi's visit to the US was his address at the United Nations, where there he made a very important point of why India is integral to global progress and prosperity. But does the UN even matter any longer?
Well, I think that's a strong statement designed to provoke probably a sharp response from me. And look, there's some truth in what you say. And the truth is that on the big issues of the day, the UN is often missing. We saw that, for example, when it came to responding to the COVID, which has been the biggest crisis in the last 100 years. But having said that, there's no better alternative. So it has its limitations. It can definitely, it's crying out for reform. Okay, everybody knows it, but there are vested interests, a few countries which are blocking the reform process, and we've all struggled with that. But what I saw this time was a much greater sentiment among members that, look, we waited long enough, now we need to get the reform moving. So I'm quite hopeful something will start up. I don't think people are content to kick this can down the road. But to come back to your question, the bottom line is this. For all its limitations, and the limitations are visible, there are many, this is still the best that we've got. So we have to work with it, improve it, not turn our backs on it.
Absolutely, and perhaps that is why India is currently serving on the 15-member UN Security Council.
Yes, sure.
So how do you assess our tenure so far, and what have we actually achieved?
Well, I think our tenure has been very good in terms of addressing many of the contemporary challenges of this era. We have this every month. One Security Council member is a president. We had our presidency in the month of August. Now, we were actually able to make progress on some really tricky issues. For example, we had a special session which we convened, which Prime Minister himself chaired, on maritime security. Now, maritime security is an extremely tricky issue because it involves competing interests, laws of the seas. That whole rigmarole. And yet we actually managed to bridge differences and create some kind of common ground. We also, by the way, did something very interesting, which was we had a session on securing the peacekeepers by creating an app which gave them domain awareness when they operate in difficult missions. And I think it kind of reinforced that image of an tech-centric India. I would say, apart from providing vaccines to peacekeepers, which we did, which in fact gave that image of the pharma-based India, this was very useful for them. We chaired a session on counterterrorism, which again, in fact, at that time, Afghanistan events had started to gather a faster pace. And finally, we actually ended our own presidency in this month with a very important session. We did 3 meetings on Afghanistan, but the third one actually produced an outcome document, a presidential statement. It has a number 2593, which in a way has summed up the international community's position on Afghanistan. So I think looking back, it was a good 1 month, but looking before that month and after that month, I think we've been very active in the Security Council. You can see, because I now go there more often than I would have in other circumstances, you can actually see the credibility of India. The fact that people come to us to broker some kind of understanding on very polarized issues.
Because they see India as a bridge builder, actually.
Yes, they see India as a bridge builder, as a very sober, responsible sort of state. So that is, I think, over the years, yes, we have created a certain brand in the world, and I think that sort of shows.
I'm glad you mentioned Afghanistan, because that has really become one of the major subjects of global discourse. Now, India was one of the largest developmental partners of Afghanistan.
Right.
We invested more than $3 billion in that country, building roads, electricity lines, dams, even the parliament building. But now, with the Taliban taking over that country, does all that investment go down the drain?
No, because, if I were to take a famous line and invert it, this was not business, it was personal. It was personal because we invested in the people of Afghanistan, in the citizens of Afghanistan. I don't think the goodwill, the return of investment on this is huge, because it is a belief in India, it is the image of India, it is the sentiment for India out there. I don't think any of that has changed. In fact, my sense is even people in the Taliban actually recognize the good work that we have done. And again, my understanding is that the average Afghan, or I would say even the Afghans in positions of authority, compare what we have done in the last 20 years with what others have done and what some of their own neighbors have done. Many of the, one particular neighbor has brought only grief to that country. So look at, our legacy or our achievements or our assets, our contribution, and what they have brought. So I am very convinced that all the good that we have done will outlast the political turbulence that Afghan society, whoever is running Afghanistan, living in Afghanistan, will see the value of that. My sense is they already do. And I think it's a very good thing we did. And certainly our intention as we look ahead is to continue our strong relationship with the Afghan people.
Let me now turn to China. You have said on record that India-China relations are currently in their most difficult phase in the last 30 years. How did this happen? And what can be done to repair this important relationship?
Well, because I think through most of our careers in diplomacy, you would agree that the working assumption has been that if there is peace and tranquility in the border areas, the relationship would develop, because people, the two countries would find areas to agree on and would naturally grow that. And if you look, especially after 1988, the border stabilized. We didn't solve the boundary problem. Those negotiations are still going on, but by and large, the border was stable. The last time before 2020 there was bloodshed on the border was 1975. Okay, so for 45 years you actually had stability on the border. There were transgressions and infractions, but that's where it was. Now, during this period, actually, if you look, India-China relations have grown in different dimensions. I mean, trade is huge, tourism was big, you had projects, you had a physical presence of businesses in each other's countries. So all of that was happening. Now, if the foundation of this entire growth is disturbed, which is peace and tranquility in the border, naturally, the structures above can't be impervious to that. So, I mean, to me, it's a common sense proposition that if it's like you and I have built a business by being, if not friendly with each other, at least being respectful and being understanding on basics. Now, what we saw was actually a violation of agreements, of written agreements on how the border is to be managed. So I think, yes, I mean, certainly, in my view, it is not to the benefit of either country that this continue. But if we need to, in your words, repair this situation, I think the starting point is that the agreements which we have signed, at least we must live up to it. And we must ensure that peace and tranquility in the boundary areas is restored. And we must make sure that no attempt is made to change the status quo along the LAC unilaterally. So, I mean, to me, it's not rocket science. The answers are all there. I mean, it happened because, for whatever reason, one side chose to depart from the norm, from a history of 35, 40 years. So I think they need to come back to what worked for both of us.
Absolutely. China has also reacted very negatively to the formation of the Quad. They have repeatedly called it the Asian NATO and said it will find no support. Is there any merit at all in the Chinese argument?
No, look, I've spoken about this in the past as well. I think this whole NATO kind of analogy, I mean, this is a hearkening to the past. It's an era actually in which we were less involved. It's those who participated very deeply in the Cold War and exploited it who tend to use those terms, okay? It's not us. My point is very simple. I had shared with you that the Quad is about countries coming together for a set of shared objectives which are good for the world. I mean, during this Quad summit, Prime Minister Modi actually used this term. He said, look, we must be a force for global good. And we mean that very sincerely. So I think today, if you look at what the Quad is doing, I mean, Quad is trying, for example, to produce a vaccine leveraging the capabilities of all four. Quad is trying to improve innovation and critical technologies so that everybody is more trusting about it. Quad is helping with mobility. Quad is focused on climate change, on connectivity. So I would sort of respond to you this way, that all of us as sovereign countries have national interests, have rights to make choices, should have the ability to pick our partners, and I don't believe any country should have a veto on the others.
It is only natural that following on from China, I should turn to the virus sweeping the world. Now, in your book, The India Way, you argue that in its systemic impact, the coronavirus may be the most consequential global happening after 1945. So let me ask you, how do you see the post-COVID world evolving? And can we ever go back to the old normal?
Short answer, no. Longer answer, I wrote that my recollection is maybe early summer of last year. Okay, that's when the book went to the publisher. Even within the first few months, you could see, this was going to snowball into something very, very big. And I must say, it has exceeded not just expectations, it has exceeded imagination. What has happened to the world, I mean, to call it devastation would be the understatement of the century. Now, if you had such a cataclysmic event, okay, where there's not a single society which has been left untouched, how can the world be the same again? Now, look at what would be the normal reactions to this, okay? People, for example, would today are much more concerned about transparency and trust. People are very worried about what happens if one region gets choked and therefore your supplies don't come. So how do supply chains change? People actually are actually concerned about the health aspects of it and the consequences. If you're going to respond with vaccines, then who produces which vaccine, how is it shared, what are then systems of travel? There are a lot of second order, third order consequences. I think in many ways we need to be honest about this. The world's much more anxious after the COVID, is much more suspicious after the COVID. It is much more insecure after the COVID. How we define national security has changed. One of the things which did during the first lockdown was we made an exception and kept the food supplies to the Gulf going. And that the amount of goodwill that has earned us, is only second to the supply of vaccines and medicines. So my sense is, if I were to give you a political science consequence, I think it has created the momentum for decentralized globalization. We can't run away from globalization. Okay, everybody accepts that. But people have learned the danger of centralized globalization, of overdependence. And they've also learned the importance of democratic, open, in a sense, more trustworthy systems, transparent systems.
This brings me to the subject of vaccines. What did it take to get the United Kingdom to finally recognize Indian travelers vaccinated with Covishield, which is, after all, a licensed production of their own AstraZeneca?
Yes, it is. And I think, in my view, this problem should not have happened in the first place. But since it did happen, you did what you do in diplomacy, which is you reason with the other party, but you also reason with a strong degree of firmness. And I think once all the arguments were put forward in the right manner, I think they came to the decision that they did. But if I can, in a sense, go back in our conversation, to my mind, this is a very, very good example of why foreign policy and diplomacy matters to the average person. That our ability today to deal with policymakers in public health in the UK actually impacts somebody who would be sitting in India, who would be completely inconvenienced by this. And again, it's, we're going to have a lot of this. I'm today very, very focused on how do I get different countries across the world to reach, an acceptable, reciprocal, something which works for both of us, agreements on respecting vaccine certifications. I think the world's going to have a big travel problem, because if we don't do that, if each one of us takes the view that, I'll only let you in if you use my vaccine, then we are actually killing the world economy. We are constricting travel. There are so many professions. And believe me, particularly for Indians, this matters. Remember, we brought back 7 million people during Vande Bharat. Okay? Many of them are going to go back. We have, I would say, probably somewhere between 750,000 students in the world. They need to reach the universities. We have hundreds of thousands of seafarers. They are crews on ships who will need, to be empowered to do their work. So this will have huge consequences. To me, these are actually the real issues, which, foreign policy is not an analytical exercise or a kind of a real-life risk game that you are playing with each other. All of that is there. I'm not in denial of that. But I think the bigger we've got, the more globalized we've got, the more our citizens find that their everyday lives are being affected by these decisions. I see this as a big responsibility, and the UK example is a very appropriate one.
My final question is on the broad contours of Indian foreign policy. You have seen it evolve over the last 40 years. You have yourself played a role in shaping it in recent times. What is new in our foreign policy?
I think in many ways we are a much more practical foreign policy than we were before, which means we've always been very good at articulation, very good at argumentation, at policy expressions. I think the bit which needed to come on speed was, getting your projects done, delivering on your promises. I think if I were to pick a single big change in the last few years, that's been a very, very big change. If you look at our track record, how do we do it on the ground? The second is capability. Look, we are a much bigger nation with more instruments in our toolkit. So we have the ability to do more, and the world has higher expectations because they can see that capability. The third would be confidence, because you can have that capability, but if you don't have the confidence, so when do you step forward? And if you see particularly the last few years, again, I point to you an experience we went through together, which was responding to the Nepal earthquake. Now, honestly, we moved heaven and earth that day and ensured that our plane was in there by the end of the evening, and the kind of, what the entire or the whole of the government, in a sense, came together for that effort. Now, it wasn't a single case. We've We've done some remarkable things in Yemen during the civil war, in natural disasters like Mozambique cyclone. Look at Vande Bharat. I put it to you that it would have been difficult for us to even imagine an operation of this scale a few years ago. I mean, this is the largest recorded evacuation
in human history.
So I think, as I said, practicality, capability, confidence, yes. But then there's one more part. And that, I think, is reflecting the changes in our own society. I mean, today, I would say this is the foreign policy and diplomacy of an India that is more Bharat. That, we are today much more confident and sure about projecting our traditions, our culture, our values to the international community. And to my mind, that is intrinsic actually to the rise, or you can say return, of a civilizational stage to the world stage. So, the changing metaphors, idioms, expressions, that to me is also very much a part of the change.
Dr. Jaishankar, thank you so much for these remarkable insights. You have truly enlarged our understanding of Indian foreign policy and its vision for the world. This is all I have for you tonight. Join me next week on another edition of Diplomatic Dispatch. Till then, good evening and goodbye.